I'm going to go to our first speaker, who's Sarah Forster. Sarah's Chief Exec of the Good Economy Partnership, which is an organisation that she founded in 2015, having spent over 25 years at the forefront of sustainable economic development, finance and impact measurement. So welcome, Sarah, and over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tracy. And yes, thank you everyone for joining this session. So I wanted to share with you an update really on the work that's been done to develop a sector standard approach to reporting on environmental, social and governance criteria for the affordable housing sector. I'm pleased to be here with Clarion Home Group and NatWest, who are all part of the working group behind this initiative. But I really wanted to sort of bring everybody up to speed, and very much we would welcome questions. I mean, first, just a few more words about the Good Economy. We're a specialist advisory firm set up about 5 years ago. We come from backgrounds in economic development, but are very much believers in, how can we influence capital, the financial sector, to play a more active and positive role in achieving inclusive and sustainable development, both in the UK and internationally. And certainly, we see good housing as, an essential part of a good economy. Having access to a safe, quality, affordable home is, absolutely fundamental. And I think we've all recognised that in these times of COVID. This initiative, so we do, we have a professional advisory firm, but we also run collaborative projects. And this ESG work we've been running as a sort of collaborative public good project. So just to give you a little bit of backdrop to how this all started, this actually was initiated by Peabody, who most of you I'm sure will know, and Centris, a corporate finance firm. And what they were seeing is that there is an increasing interest among the financial sector to make investments and provide loans that can also demonstrate sort of their environmental and social credentials. That's in the light of growing global concerns about climate change and how do we take action against climate change, but also concerns about sort of growing inequality on the social side. And it was clear that, the social and affordable housing sector has had private finance for decades, and actually is an obvious opportunity to invest to have a sort of ESG and positive impact. But lenders and investors were sort of sending ESG questionnaires out to housing associations in many different formats with a lot of different requests for information, and there was no consistent way of the sector really demonstrating its ESG credentials. So the thinking was there was a real need for the finance sector to come together with the housing sector to develop a sector standard that was consistent, that was meaningful, and would provide the information that investors and lenders need, but that also would help housing associations sort of manage their operations against sort of good environmental and social outcomes. So we were invited to lead the initiative as a bit of a sort of trusted, I suppose, expert intermediary. We've been doing that since last summer, and I'll just give you an update on where we're at. So essentially, we developed a sort of participatory process to develop a standard that was founded on 3 core principles. One is that we wanted to make sure that any sort of ESG criteria and metrics that we proposed were building off what already existed in the sector and in international standards. So we didn't want to come up with new reporting standards, but build off what existed where they existed. So that was one principle. The second was that we wanted to come up with an ESG reporting standard that would be possible for all size housing associations to use. And the third, that we wanted to focus on sort of questions and criteria that are important and meaningful and capable of being answered, that you could actually provide data, you could provide information in answer to the criteria. So those were the sort of principles behind how we worked. In May of this year, we published a white paper, which hopefully many of you have seen, where we described really, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And, our early chapters were saying, the reality right now is we have a housing market that's not delivering affordable homes for all. The National Housing Federation has just put forward its latest figures showing that 7.9 million people, 8 million people are affected in some way by lack of a quality affordable home, be that homeless or in, you know, unsuitable overcrowded accommodation. And clearly what is also rising up the agenda is that a lot of our housing stock is old, and is not fit for purpose and in a position to sort of meet our net zero target. So the environmental agenda is coming front and, you know, and center in the housing world as well. So, you know, what the paper argued is that there is clearly a need for public investment in affordable housing, particularly in social rent and in this agenda, but also that private capital has an important role to play. And how can we bring private capital into the market that is really accountable for delivering on environmental and social outcomes, and that this ESG reporting framework will provide a way of ensuring sort of accountability and transparency to ESG performance across investors and the housing sector. So then in the white paper, we put forward a first version of the ESG approach. It originally had 10 themes and 45 criteria. We've since been out to public consultation, including webinars and inviting people to sort of send comments on what we propose. We got a huge response. We've had over 400 organisations, you know, get in touch with us in one way or the other, from, you know, big banks and investors through to housing associations of all sizes, from the largest housing organisations down to smaller cooperative housing associations and also tenants groups. We've also tried to make sure that we talk to housing associations in Scotland and Wales. So we've had separate webinars with housing associations there. So as a result, we've been over the last, since the consultation closed at the end of July, we've been sort of analysing all of that feedback, and we're planning to publish a final version of the sort of what we're now calling the sustainability reporting standard at the end of October. And I just wanted to touch on particularly some of the themes that are coming out on the environmental side, and I'm sure my colleagues will go into more depth, but certainly, you know, climate change is a big theme within the criteria, and there are metrics linked to how we measure environmental performance of buildings and sort of energy efficiency in terms of the operations. There's a number of criteria around that. I'm not going to go into detail, but, you know, if you want me to, I can in the Q&A. Another aspect within environment is actually ecology and sort of protection of biodiversity, and then also resource management. So those are the three big themes where we have a number of measures that we've developed. I think also what came across clearly in the feedback is the strong intersection between energy efficiency and affordability. That the more energy efficient homes are, you know, the likelihood is that we're going to get lower utility bills. And, you know, I'm sure you're all very aware of sort of fuel poverty. So there was a very much a sense that actually delivering environmental outcomes also delivers better social outcomes. So that was one of the things that came up in the feedback. The other key point of the criteria is that, you know, it covers governance as well. And what we would say is that, you know, for you know, environmental and social matters to be taken seriously, they absolutely need to be part of business strategy and become topics that the board and cares about and part of good governance. And that's certainly going to be reflected in the revised approach. The other thing I would just highlight is that in the discussion, so the criteria were developed in conversation between investors and the housing sector. And what we really found is that there was an interest not in some sort of ESG tick box, you know, job done ESG approach, but really everybody wanted an approach that was meaningful and also forward looking. So particularly on the environmental agenda, it was recognized that for many housing associations, this is a new agenda. You know, some of the larger housing associations have heads of sustainability and, you know, staff dedicated to this topic, but many don't. And, you know, investors were saying to us, what we're looking to see really is that there's a strategy in place and some sense of beginning to set targets and actions against those targets. But it is that you know, understanding of a sort of direction of travel that mattered to investors more than potentially having sort of hard performance data, at least in the beginning of focusing on environmental matters. So where are we now? I mean, just to share with you where we're at. So we've been working on revising the criteria, and what we've done is put out a call to action. And I hope many of you have heard this, but if you haven't, I'm sort of telling you now, what we're looking for is early adopters. We want to create a sort of ESG sector standard that really is one that has momentum and creates a unity between the finance sector and the housing sector, and one that people are going to use. So what we're calling upon early adopters to sign up and be the sort of first users of the standard. So what this means in practice is for housing associations, if you sign up or register your interest to become an early adopter, we'll share the revised version of the criteria with you before they go public, which we will be doing sort of end of next week. And then we're going to be having a webinar specifically for early adopters to talk about what it means to be an early adopter. But in essence, what we believe it means is that you will report against these ESG criteria in your annual reports. That could be, some of this information will probably already be in your annual accounts. You may also want to publish a separate sustainability report. So Optivo actually recently took the criteria and have done that. And then on the lender and investor side, we're asking lenders and investors to replace their questionnaires with this set of criteria, so that all lenders and investors are asking for the same type of information. You know, what we believe this will do by having a sector standard, which, you know, right now is a voluntary standard, but that it will actually help the housing sector access the capital markets more broadly. There is a lot of interest, you know, within the UK, but also European pension funds and big institutional investors to invest in affordable housing with good ESG credentials. So, you know, sometimes we get asked, well, will this, you know, provide some, you know, benefit from pricing? It's hard to say, but it'll certainly help open up sources of capital, and in that way there'll be, you know, good competition on pricing. In terms of your access, you know, your cost of capital. So, you know, if you haven't heard about it and are interested in being an early adopter, please get in touch. We'll put you on the list. If you're not either a practitioner or a lender or investor, but are sort of engaged in the sector in another way, we also have a category of what we're calling endorsers. So those will be the trade organisations. So the National Housing Federation is very much, you know, involved. We hope the Northern Housing Forum will become an endorser, but other professional services bodies we would also expect to be signing up as endorsers. We've had Savills and Trowse and Hamlin have been part of the working group and certainly fall into that category. Two other things to say before I close. One is governance. We want this standard to be a living standard, one that is useful and adopted by the housing and financial sector and tested and developed over time in line with sort of changing practice and standards. So we're planning to set up a governance structure. There will be a board overseeing the further development of the standard, and we very much want that to be practitioner-led. I think the power of this initiative is that it's been led by, you know, practitioners. This is not a top-down standard that has come from some outside body. This is a standard that's been developed, you know, with and for stakeholders in the market. So there will be a governance body set up, which will also be announcing in October and looking for people to put their names forward to be on that board. The early adopters will form a working group beneath that board and will be sharing their experience of actually using the ESG framework in practice. And then the final thing to say is we've also had put in motion a follow-on initiative looking at impact reporting. Impact reporting is slightly different from ESG reporting, is that when you're talking about impact, there is a focus on sort of intentionality, that you're actually defining what good looks like. You know, what is the impact you want to create and how do you measure and report on that? And this working group comprises housing providers, but also investors, particularly investors who are bringing new forms of capital to the housing sector in the form of equity. Now, I'm sure some of you are familiar with those new forms of capital. Some of them have come into the specialist housing market, you know, providing lease and lease-backed arrangements. You know, we know that has met with controversy. There have been critics of these new models, but our belief is there is a role for new forms of private capital, but it absolutely needs to be held to account for impact, you know, having a positive impact, and we need to be very aware of where any negative risks exist, sort of systemically or you know, for underlying registered providers. So our impact framework is looking to come up with a standardized approach to measuring and reporting on impact, both positive and negative. So that group is currently operational. If everyone's interested, you know, happy to speak more about that. So, I mean, I think, you know, I'll just close by saying, you know, this is a sector standard that has actually really taken off. I have to say, when we started this project, I don't think any of us, including those in the working group, necessarily thought it would have so much interest, but it feels like it is very timely and useful. And actually, we're now being held up, and those involved should be proud of this as actually having developed a collaborative approach that perhaps other sectors should look at when looking to develop ESG standards. So I think it is that sort of spirit of collaboration and focus on, you know, really delivering real world, you know, outcomes for your residents and tenants and for the environment that's very much, you know, been at the core of this initiative. So I'll stop there and hand back to Tracy, but obviously I'm, you know, very happy to answer any questions.
Sarah, thank you so much. It's really interesting. Can I just ask you, so you're looking for early adopters to sign up. You're just going out with this now, or are there already a number of housing associations who are signed up? And
yeah, no, absolutely. As of today, we have 31 housing associations signed up. A real mix, some of the largest, but also some smaller housing associations. And then I think we have 23 lenders and investors.
Okay.
So we'd like to get to 50, and we'd love good representation from the north. So
okay. Do you have much northern representation at the moment?
We have, we've got Home Group and Guinness Partnership. I think Places for People have expressed interest, and a number of others. I'll have a look at the list. So we have got some representation, but we'd like more.
Well, there's a call to arms for the people who are on this call today. We haven't got any questions that have come through as yet, and I know that some will come through as the speakers continue. So we'll come back to you shortly, Sarah, if that's okay.
Right. Thank you.
Really interesting. We're going to go now for a funder's view. So next on the panel is Marcus Navarro. And Marcus is Director of Housing Finance in Commercial and Private Banking for NatWest. And Marcus leads on the ESG and sustainability agenda. So Marcus, I'll hand over to you, and your slides are appearing there now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Tracy, thanks for that. Yeah, so I've pulled some slides together. Now there's quite a bit of information in these slides, so I don't intend to go through it in huge amounts of detail, but I know that Liam will circulate these as well on the back of the call. Liam, I don't know if you just want to go to the next slide. So just to sort of set the scene in terms of NatWest's involvement in the sector and the role that we think we can and should play in supporting both housing associations and the wider UK economy. I think it's fair to say that we all acknowledge that climate change is one of the biggest challenges of our lifetime. So, you know, as one of the biggest lenders to the UK, you know, we understand that we need to play our role in that. So the risk that it faces, that our clients face, the bank faces as well in terms of climate change. So just in terms of actual loan facilities to the sector, so NatWest currently provides 12 billion of loan commitments to the housing association sector. And what we did at the start of this year, well, at the start of the pandemic, was come out with a refreshed commitment to the sector of 3 billion of additional funding over the next 3 years. So we believe that will support the development of around 20,000 new homes, but also help to improve the living conditions in existing properties as well. And that will also play a part in helping our housing associations, one, to deliver new affordable homes that are green, but also dealing with retrofit as well, which is the big elephant in the room. So the total facilities that are available to the sector at the moment, it's around £100 billion, and of that, 60 billion of that is bank debt. The rest of it is made up from the capital markets. So at the moment, NatWest currently provides around 12% of all facilities available to the sector. In addition to that, NatWest also helps both housing associations and local authorities access alternative sources of funding. So we aren't just utilising the bank's balance sheet, but we are also able to help our customers access private placements and public bonds. And I'll sort of give a bit of a snapshot around some of the activity that we're seeing in that space as well. So it's fair to say that ESG and socially responsible investing aren't new concepts, but in recent years, these have definitely become more of a focus for all organisations, including housing associations as well. The big question that I had on my mind, and I think everyone was thinking about, was how does COVID-19 impact that? And one thing that I would say is that we haven't seen this agenda fall away on the back of the recent pandemic. And actually what we have seen is that there's more focus both from public investors around the social aspect as well as the environmental aspects in terms of both investment and activity as well. If you can just go to the next slide, Liam, I think it's worth, one of the things that I don't like doing, and I'm very, very sort of clear about this, is that I don't like both the bank or investors or customers as well to greenwash. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last number of years is getting our own house in order as well. And this just touches on some of the climate commitments that we've made as a bank. One of the main things is making sure that we're helping to end the most harmful activity. So one of the things that we came out with was around stopping lending to any companies with more than 15% of activities related to coal, unless they have a credible transition plan in line with the 2015 Paris Agreement. And we actually plan to fully phase out from coal by 2030. We also want to help and support our customers, our mortgage customers, to become more energy efficient. So we want to, we have an ambition for more than 50% of our mortgage book to have an EPC rating of C or above by 2030. And we're also looking at creating products and services to help our customers track their carbon footprint as well. There's a pilot that's at the moment that's been launched, which is helping our personal customers to track the carbon footprint and the carbon emissions that are generated through their transactions. If that's successful, that will be rolled out to millions of customers and hopefully replicated across the wider finance sector as well. We're also looking to support the drive to decarbonise UK transport sector through the Future Mobility Group, and we're also focusing on some of our asset management strategies in terms of helping to reduce the level of carbon intensity with that. During 2018 to 2020, we committed to providing 10 billion of funding, sustainable funding. We increased that at the start of the year. We actually doubled it to 20 billion over the next 2 years. We also run a number of accelerator hubs for small startup businesses, and we're reserving at least 25% of those places to organisations that are supporting environmental activities. And we're also doing a number of other initiatives around upskilling our own internal members of staff and supporting things like the ESG white paper as well. So there's lots of activity that are going on at the moment. If you can just go to the slide here, which is slide number 11, number 4 on yours, sorry. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. The numbers haven't formatted on mine. So just in terms of why is sustainability important for the real estate sector and NatWest? So I think it's fair to say that you only have to turn on to the news to realise that there's growing public interest in the broader sustainability agenda. But I think it's just worth noting some of those figures there as well. So the real estate sector, together with its supply chain, has a huge part to play in the UK reaching net zero by 2050. So 40% of the UK's carbon footprint is attributed to the built environment, and construction activity generating over 30% of the UK's total yearly waste. with the majority of that being sent to landfill. So that's based on current activity, and a recent study estimates a need to build over 380,000 affordable homes every year for the next 15 years across Great Britain, of which 100,000 should be social rent. So that just shows both the challenge that housing associations and local authorities have to deliver and address the housing crisis that the UK faces. But obviously with that, the increase in any development is going to have an impact on carbon emissions as well. So the improving energy efficiency is key to reducing the carbon footprint of the built environment. So much of this will need to be achieved by decarbonising existing stock, as 80% of buildings that will be in operation in 2050 have already been built. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face around retrofitting. And I don't have the answers for you, and I don't think anyone has necessarily got the answers. But the key thing is working together to try and understand what investment is required, when, where, and then helping our customers and organisations to be able to access that. If you just go to the next slide, great. So in addition to traditional funding, there are lots of different options that are available to organisations. So whether that's asset finance, structured asset finance, project finance, and then green and sustainable bonds, green and sustainable private placements, and sustainability linked loans as well. So there's a real mix of financing solutions that are available to all organisations. And I think it's fair to say that we have seen the sustainability linked loans and both green and sustainable bonds significantly increase. And just in terms of the green and sustainable bonds, we've also seen a huge uplift in social bonds as well. So one of the things that I can talk about in a little bit more detail is sustainability linked funding options. So when I talked about the 10 billion that we provided during 2018 to 2020, if we break that down, 3.4 billion of that was sustainable energy lending. So that was investing in renewable infrastructure projects, renewable energy. We also provided 2.8 billion of sustainability linked loans, and 3.7 billion of that was sustainable bonds and private placements. So we have continued to see during COVID-19 an increased interest in sustainability linked loans. It's worth to say that typically ESG objectives in the real estate sector have typically been environmentally based, usually focusing on energy efficiency and environmental ratings of buildings, both new and existing, so such as BREEAM, EPC scores, or Code for Sustainable Homes rating. One of the things that we have seen in the last year, which has been a key development, is the move to more than one KPI, including separating out new and existing buildings. So a future trend that we expect to see will be for borrowers to also incorporate social and governance KPIs alongside environmental KPIs as well. So that will allow companies to fully incorporate the full ESG spectrum. And we've already started to see that in the market this year. And again, we also expect to see the rise of new facilities with purely social focus as well. Just in terms of how ESG or sustainability linked loans at the moment, typically what they do is they have ESG objectives within them, and you will report on them on an annual basis. And what that typically allows you to do is, one, attract investors and funders who might it might increase their level of appetite to provide a facility to an organisation. And sometimes what you are able to achieve as well is by meeting those objectives is to actually get a margin reduction. So typically we tend to see that these range from around 2.5 basis points to 5 basis points per annum. If you can just go to the next slide for me, Liam, that'd be great. So these are the things that we typically see when we're looking at sustainability linked funding, and they're broken down into three sort of buckets, which is your environmental, social and governance. It's fair to say that the majority of these have been in that environmental bucket. So these gives you a feel for some of the targets or some of the objectives that might sort of justify some form of margin reduction. or just incorporating that into a loan agreement. And again, just in terms of the social side of it, we have started to see an increase in that, especially with some of the focuses around diversity and inclusion, obviously with the recent sort of Black Lives Matter movement, a lot more focus on organisations in terms of being able to articulate and deliver on their objectives on some of the social elements as well. And if you just go to the next slide for me, Liam. This just gives you a feel for a recent transaction. And this isn't anything to do with environmental. This is just purely social loan facility that was provided to an organisation which focuses on their social objectives. Works in exactly the same way as a sustainability linked loan that would have environmental targets within there. But again, I'm just flagging this because we are seeing an increased focus around social themes as well. And if you go to the next slide, this touches on some of the emerging social themes, which I think everyone will be familiar with, and has probably seen these types of activity and conversations happening more, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, I won't touch on those in great detail, but the key themes are around health and well-being. Work is being reallocated and a number of different things as well. And if you just jump to the next slide and the one after that. Yeah, here we go. Yeah. So just in terms of this, so this is some of the stuff that we've done as an institution just around our social and green bonds. We are looking at other options to do this as well. I think one of the things that we are trying to do is, at the moment, when I talk about passing on some form of margin incentive to our customers, at the moment it simply just eats into the bank's returns. So what we are trying to do is go out, as you're doing yourselves as well as organisations, is going out and raising our own social and green bonds and ultimately distributing that to organisations. And that will hopefully allow us to be able to raise capital at a lower level of cost for ourselves and pass on that benefit to our clients as well. And if you just go to the next slide for me, Liam. So this just talks around some of the activity, both from a sustainability point of view and also ESG. I think one of the questions on for this call was around where is the money coming from, who's it coming from, and who's going to pay for it. And the short answer is it's going to be a very, very mixed bag. So we're obviously seeing the government come out with announcements around how they're supporting a greener economy, and we're also seeing this at a more local level as well. One of the interesting things that came out from the World Bank Group was that they stated at the start of September that social bond issuance had totaled 43 billion so far this year, compared to 17 billion during 2019. And it's been suggested that a large percentage of this fund has already been allocated to dealing with or helping to mitigate against COVID-19 as well. And again, we've continued to see that in terms of green bonds as well, just the number of increased. And if you go to the next slide, and this sort of covers off, I guess, what Sarah was talking about as well. So, it's clear that there's more interest from organisations, both investors and housing associations, in terms of their ESG strategies, but there does remain a lack of standardised ESG data and reporting methods. So one of the things that we're really keen to do is support the work that Sarah's doing as part of the ESG reporting to standardise that approach. We know that if organisations are able to articulate their ESG activity, both past, present and future, that they are able to attract more investors and potentially more competitive capital, which will obviously help with the additional investment that is required as well. And as Sarah noted, the key thing now is really to make sure that we get the early adopters so that it does become a standardised approach. It's all well and good, running with this as an idea, but if the sector as a whole, and banks and investors don't sort of latch onto it and use it as a standard approach, then it just doesn't have the weighting that it wouldn't have otherwise. So in terms of just conscious of time, so just in terms of wrapping up, really, I think it's fair to say that housing associations, some of the largest charities, landlords and organisations in the UK, just like banks, have to play a leading role in making communities and the world that we live in a better place, both for current and future generations. And one thing that I would say is that, whilst it often feels like one world event replaces another, we've definitely not seen the subject of ESG fall away during COVID-19. And actually, we think that this will be more of a focus for both funders, investors, and housing associations going forward. The key thing that I would say is that you should be having active conversations with your existing funders and new funders to explore the options that are available to you. The most important thing is being able to articulate what you plan to do. And going again to Sarah's point, we appreciate that different organisations are very, very different, both in terms of their opportunities and their challenges. We don't expect a housing association that's got potentially 80% of its stock is old, and if it's a LSVT and it's sort of acquired stock that needs huge amount of investment, we don't necessarily expect that organisation to have the same, carbon footprint as a new organisation that's building new homes as well. So there isn't a one size fits all, and that ranges from different sizes of organisations with different types of stock. And also on a regional and national basis, we appreciate that there are different challenges, which makes it harder for you guys to sort of come to us and say, this is what we want to do, can you help us? But actually, if you have those early conversations with your funders, then hopefully you can articulate that in a way which allows you to access the best sources of capital to fund the investment that's needed. So happy to take, I appreciate I've tried to cover quite a lot there in a very short space of time. I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you've got, but I'll pass back to you, Tracy, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. We've got some questions starting to come in. I'm gonna use Chair's privilege to ask a question first, which is, one of the thorny issues that we have in the north is that we have large areas with very low market values, where you invest in improving the carbon efficiency of a home and it's still not going to be worth any more. What's a lender's perspective on that? Because I mean that's the real struggle that a lot of our members will be faced with.
Yeah, that's fine, and I think it's so obviously within the social housing sector, they have their own sort of unique valuation methodology anyway, which is slightly different than valuing an asset in the real estate sector. That being said, we do appreciate that there are lots of challenges, both in terms of how can housing associations get banks and investors comfortable with accepting MMC types of properties, different new ways of construction. It's fair to say that the banks are probably a little bit more traditional in terms of the assets that they allow to be charged. So there's huge amounts of challenges around that. There's huge amounts of challenges around security, the additional investment that's required both in existing stock and new stock. Obviously, that is a challenge. Security is always going to be a challenge as well. But one of the things that we are looking at, and it's, when we talk about the margin benefits that are being passed on as a result of sustainability-linked loans, I know from the conversations that I have with housing associations that shaving 2.5 basis points or 5 basis points off a loan facility is not going to make a whole lot of difference. So one of the things that we can look to, obviously we're a bank, and it's important that we sort of treat customers the same and sort of have security levels that are consistent with the market. But one thing that I would say is, if you're really sort of having that concern around security levels, just have the conversation with your bank, and that's where realistically those are the sort of direction that we need to move in, to start having those types of conversations. So it is a challenge, there isn't an answer for it, but actually if you are able to articulate the benefit that it would have to the UK economy, to you as an organisation, to dealing with some of these challenges, the best thing to do is start having that conversation sooner rather than later. And it might be that you can turn around and say, right, we've got our own old loan facilities, these work, but actually we want to do something really ambitious. If you're able to articulate how you're going significantly above what you would just do as a normal course of business, there's definitely a conversation to be had with your funder. And without speaking too highly of the banks, because I know that everyone's got their own views, but actually for me, this is where it's really, really important to have a good relationship with an investor or a funder, to be able to have those conversations, because these are the conversations that need to be had sooner rather than later. So I know I haven't answered your question. It is a challenge, but having that conversation sooner rather than later will help to deal with some of these challenges as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, we've got some questions from Gordon Watts. And Gordon, if you'll bear with me, I think that one of the questions you've asked, I want to ask all of the panelists when we get to the end, rather than just asking it of Marcus. We've got one from Sarah, which is great overview. Loved hearing that NatWest is supporting the move away from fossil fuel investment. On a retrofit front, is there any consideration to move on from EPCs as being the best reporting tool for retrofit, such as performance monitoring?
Yes. So at the moment, EPC tends to be the most recognised, both just internally within the bank and when we're having conversations with clients as well. That seems to be the best metric for us to refer to. So we're quite firm in terms of using EPC ratings as a benchmark, and that seems to be when we're having conversations that does tend to be the one that comes up the most. That being said, we are very, very open to different ways of monitoring that, and if there is a better way to do it, then there isn't a one size fits all, and we're not prescriptive about it. In terms of the mortgage book that we're looking at, so when I mentioned earlier on that we're trying to get 50% of our mortgage book to be an EPC rating of C or above, or an equivalent of EPC. So we are open to that, and we do appreciate that when we're having this conversation now, we'll talk about EPC ratings, but actually in reality, as we move down the line, just with some of the changes in terms of regulation, and some of the changes that are being announced, will be announced on the back of the white paper, and all these different things, that as soon as you say we'll do one thing, by the time you've come out and announced it, it changes. So it is very fluid, and actually that's one of the things that does make it more difficult, because there isn't necessarily a benchmark, and it will work itself out, but it will continue to evolve. And again, the key thing is, if you've got an equivalent that you think is more relevant to your organisation, then that's the one that you really should be sticking with. But EPC ratings do tend to be the most commonly talked about at the moment. So there are options to do different things.
Okay, great, thank you, Gordon. I'm not ignoring your questions. I think it's a great question that I want to ask everybody. So I'm going to park that one for the time being, and thank Marcus again. And can we now go on to Will Ray? Will is Head of Sustainability for Clarion Housing Group. Over to you, Will.
Unmute myself there. There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Will Ray. I am Head of Sustainability for Clarion Housing Group. I am going to go without slides today, so I'm just going to chat through a bit of our experience of dealing with sustainable finance, and a little bit about the impact on us day to day, and then a little bit about what we're doing around sustainability generally, and our plans going forward, maybe a little bit of focus on net zero as well. So for those who don't know me, I've sort of got 20 years of experience in sustainability. So I've kind of been around doing lots of different things for many years. But Clarion itself, we are the largest social landlord in the country, and obviously we've got a heritage dating back over 100 years with William Sutton and the like. We currently provide good quality, affordable homes, probably as many of you do, for people priced out of the property market. We're a developer as well as a landlord, so we're now building thousands of affordable homes per year. We've significantly scaled up our efforts in this area over the last few years, and we continue to do that over the coming years. We also invest in residents and communities through Clarion Futures, which is our charitable foundation. And again, that is targeting around 150 million over 10 years. We have 125,000 properties. That's probably quite different to a lot of you. And we're based across 170 local authorities. So we're widespread, including the north. It's important to add that when Clarion was formed a few years ago through the merger, we have been serious from the start about sustainability and its importance. There was lots of work going on before that, but since Clarion's formation, we are really keen to take a leadership role on environmental, social and governance issues. So we did have a look at sustainable finance a few years ago, but it wasn't really until last year where we saw the opportunities. So a little bit about where it started. Talking with our Treasury team last year, we saw an opportunity, if you like, to start to better communicate the benefits of our work to funders and investors and the way we manage our business. And that was targeting both our existing investor base and also to potentially attract new funders as we look to scale our development work. This has been something that other sectors have benefited from. So you'll have notably seen things like green bonds issued by utilities. And as mentioned previously, this is a rapidly growing area amongst investors. So our Treasury team, in collaboration with myself, we spent a lot of time researching this. We spoke to a lot of different organisations who had raised bonds, sustainable bonds, green bonds, who had been involved in the development of those sustainable finance initiatives. And that led us to the conclusion that we would like to pursue this area. In parallel, we are involved with the European Federation of Living, and they were undertaking at the same time, a parallel initiative to establish a pan-European labelling system. And that was done through their consulting arm, which has now been spun out into a company called Ritterwald. This really sought to connect housing providers who mostly by their nature are socially and environmentally responsible, particularly compared with other kind of more stereotypical views of housing developers or property developers. Generally, they take a more socially environmentally responsible view. And so we saw that as they saw that as an opportunity to connect these organisations with investors who are prioritising social and environmental impact and the growth of that investment sector. So from that, we joined up with the initiatives to become one of the founding partners, and with Ritterwald, along with 3 other European providers, we started to shape the label and develop our own sustainable housing finance framework. You can find that on our website. It's all open and transparent. So thankfully, this involved basically compiling a series of data and responses, a little bit in line with what Sarah has talked about with the good economy in terms of an ESG screening criteria. And that was given a ranking across different criteria and a weighting. And that got us to achieve the Sustainable Housing Impact label. At the same time, we also had our Sustainable Housing Finance Framework endorsed by a second-party opinion provider, which is IMUG. And that's important for investor credibility if you're pursuing sustainable or green bonds. So we added that to the mix as well to try and add credibility with our investor base. The whole process took around 2 to 3 months. There's a bit of to and froing as we developed the rating and refined the criteria and tried to make it work across the different housing providers across Europe. But we think we came to a successful point, and it's from this that, as Sarah talked about, we've aligned with, managed to align that with the white paper as well. So from that process, we were the first housing association to achieve the certified sustainable housing label. and establish a sustainable finance framework. This led us really to our first bond issue in that realm, a sustainability bond issue at the start of this year, pre-COVID. We raised 350 billion in record time, and it was a record-breaking issue on many fronts. And really, for us, it vindicated, I guess, the fact that there was this appetite amongst investors for impact, and that we could meet that demand, and if we, and we could make that palatable to investors across Europe. And this potential, I think, has, if you like, put us on a really good footing compared to other private developers. I guess it's important to emphasise that the proceeds of that bond go towards the building of new, affordable, energy-efficient homes. So, I mean, that's really good news. And I guess it points to a potential direction in the future of where we could go as a sector. Because I think it's important to recognise that the sector has worked really hard up to now to improve, particularly on the energy performance of existing buildings. We have done a lot of the heavy lifting for the UK residential sector. We are above, the EPCs for social housing perform above private rented and above the average of England as a whole. So that's a good thing, and this is important for the sustainability journey of the UK as a whole, as Marcus mentioned. I think it's also particularly important to recognise the role, not just as an organisation which has its own impacts, but the order of magnitude bigger impacts that we as an organisation have with the residents and communities that live with us. So we support. So I think that's a really important step to kind of realise that, and something that, whereas companies driven maybe purely by profit motives, comes secondary to this is primary. This is the primary purpose of what we do. We also realised, I think, that whilst social impact through this process, whilst social impact was paramount in our work, it's not really relevant without a credible approach to governance and environmental sustainability alongside this. Impact investors are not looking to do harm on any of those fronts. And as Sarah said, good governance goes hand in glove with this. I think it is worth mentioning the alignment with the work of the good economy, because we were getting a range of inquiries. We weren't just targeting impact investors. We were talking to our existing investor set, and they were beginning to send us different surveys from their screening, assessment bodies, as they had larger and more impetus from their shareholders and boards around the environmental impact and social impacts that they're having overall. And so we were starting to answer different surveys from different investors. This was in different formats and can be quite confusing. We were filling out some forms that were designed for global chemical companies and mining companies, not just housing providers in the UK. So having an initiative which standardises this and has a consistent approach for ESG assessment across the sector makes it much easier. And we've already had feedback from a number of investors that have said that they're pleased to see this work and pleased to start seeing a consistent format. It's going to make it easier for them, which is good news for us. It makes it easier for us too. So it meets our needs and those needs, and that's really good. And again, it aligns with what we've been doing on the impact label as well. Before I drop into talking about our strategy work and what we're doing day to day, I think, like I said, I think it's important that we talk about a few points. One, the fact that we recognise what we've done so far. Also, that we recognise the journey that we've still got to go ahead, the work and effort that's required, both today in terms of our incremental improvements to our businesses, but also planning for what are going to be substantial changes tomorrow. And it's substantial changes amidst, I would say, an environment of significant uncertainty, as everyone I think would recognise. And that's uncertainty not just in things like what a post-COVID world is going to look like generally, but actually specifically on what a zero carbon future means for the housing sector. I don't think that that's necessarily been clearly articulated yet, and it's something that the government is, I know, working towards with things like the zero carbon heating strategy, but we are working in this area where we don't quite know where we're heading. But we know we need to get to this zero carbon point. And I think this is important that we start recording the data around the preparations required for this transformation, because we need to make a case both to our investors that we're ready, and also to government perhaps that we need substantial assistance with this transition. From housing association by their very nature, I think, work best with transparency. So I think integrating ESG reporting and measurement into this set of transparency means that, from what my experience has been in the past, where maybe sustainability has been seen as a tack-on issue, this does bring it core in line with the rest of the business. If your core funding is based on your environmental and social and governance performance, you're going to take that as seriously as you do in terms of reporting to the regulator or reporting your financial results. So I think that's important. Secondary, another thing I think is that recognising this issue around tenants' environmental footprint, it is an indirect impact that we have, and that is orders of magnitude greater than our own. But I think the important thing about that is that this is really an untapped potential, and that the impact requirements of investors that are searching for providing, using their money to provide solutions to global issues such as the provision of affordable homes, potentially improvements in biodiversity, mitigating the worst impacts of poverty on people's well-being and quality of life, as well as all the issues around carbon. We can meet those objectives and work with them. I think that's a really important goal to be seen to be working collaboratively on. Finally, I just make one comment about beware of the negative screen and the kind of creeping rise of the negative screen. There will come a time when, and that is probably not far away, with the articulation of the government strategy that C-rated properties are what they're aiming for, D-rated properties and below will be excluded from collateral, I think, and that's not too far away. Day to day, what do we need to do in terms of the sustainable housing label and our finance framework? Well, I think it's important we've got to achieve alignment within the business and tell everyone that we're going for these goals, and that means both a recognition at senior levels that this is important to the business, and that drives the way through the business. So in our case, this has meant that one of our group directors has taken full responsibility for sustainability and its improvement, and that's our Director of Development, Richard Cook, and he's really leading from the front in his desire to drive this within the business. Second, it means that we've got to get better at data and KPI monitoring. This can't just be tacked on the side, it's got to be in and on side with our KPI monitoring and reporting. So this means that for us as an organisation, we've got a big ERP system. It means incorporating that sustainability data capture alongside the way we would capture all our other KPIs and performance. And that's a good thing for me. It makes it easier to drive sustainability within the business. In terms of reporting, it's not a substantial onerous task. We report annually. We're just developing our first report now. It's due to be released in October, and this is going to be in line with the Sustainable Housing Impact Label and the Good Economy work. So look to that probably end of October time for us to issue that. On the Sustainable Housing Impact Label, we get annual recertification on that. I think that the impact label is appropriate for us because we are seeking that large bonds within the market that are attractive to investors. So that's appropriate for us. Finally, I guess a little bit about what we're doing to prepare for a sustainable future. And I'm a little bit hesitant to talk about this now because we are in the midst of a refresh of our sustainability strategy off the back of the success of the bond issue. We are realising that we do need to significantly upgrade our ambitions in line with expectations of stakeholders, investors, and also the climate crisis and challenges more broadly. So we are in the process of doing that. But where we are today, the focus on our key issues, I think, is going to remain. We have 5 commitments. One is around removing the worst performing of our properties, and we're well underway of that. We've now only got, I think it's around 1% that are in the E&F range. So we're about to eliminate all of our low-rated properties, and we have started our work on committing to a program of work that's part of our Clarion 2040 asset strategy, which sets a target of mid-band C for our requirements. But I think it's important to say that this is not a zero carbon strategy. It's a strategy for energy efficiency and affordability for our residents in the short to medium term, or in the medium term. Second, I think one of the greatest challenges for us, we have an integrated repairs fleet and a repairs business. So our commercial fleet is a great challenge. So we are focusing on refreshing our fleet, either to reduce the number of journeys we do or to significantly increase the proportion of electric vehicles. And we're running a number of pilots at the moment on those vehicles and how they work, and trying to get a successful transition to electric vehicles. Not an easy transition at all, and needs a lot of work. We're also trying to enable employees to be active participants in green living. I think that's rather changed with the working environment that we're in now, but we are still trying to focus on training and rewarding action, particularly around the decisions that people are making when they pursue procurement. Thirdly, fuel poverty remains a huge issue, I think, across the sector. And so we have set up a dedicated support through our Clarion Futures charitable foundation that integrates with our money guidance. I'm quite proud of this work that's been done by Clarion Futures. It is one of the first sort of integrated money guidance and fuel poverty services around, and it seeks to connect it back with the asset side of our business, so we can do the social side of fuel poverty improvement and the physical side together. Fourthly, we've got our new build homes. We've got a new set of sustainability standards of those. I can't really talk much about them at the moment because, again, we're about to launch on those, but watch this space and you will hear terms like net zero bandied around and specific timelines and projects on that. Finally, just as an organisation ourselves, we need to be reducing our direct emissions and our non-recyclable waste, so we are targeting those. Most recently, we secured procurement for all our key electricity suppliers as 100% green electricity, so we're very happy about that and achieve that at no cost increase because of the scale at which we're buying it. Finally, I'd just like to make a couple of comments about the drive to net zero. Obviously, I said that we're not quite exactly clear on the target levels of where we're going to, but I think there are a few key considerations. We know that this is going to involve a substantial transition to energy efficiency and to the heating systems within our stock. Exactly what that is yet to be seen, but we are undertaking a series of pilots on that. And I think the piloting approach to try and learn and get value out of what we do is important. Second, the financial and investment models. Like I said, we haven't pursued external investment for this as yet, but we're certainly collaborating with the Green Finance Institute on their Coalition for Energy Efficient Buildings. And I'd commend that report to you that they've just produced a couple of months back on financing energy efficient buildings and the pathway they think is possible for retrofit at scale, and some of the initiatives that they've highlighted there that could potentially provide solutions. BEIS are certainly listening to what the Green Finance Institute are telling them around this. Thirdly, I think collaborations are really important. I think each individual organisation, including someone of Clarion scale, is very difficult to do innovation by itself. So we are working with our plan investment contractors, with local authorities, with other housing associations to try and achieve this in achieve zero carbon across the range of different types of buildings that we have, and to achieve that as quickly as possible and to learn from each other. And that's it for me. And you can see the Sustainable Housing Impact label behind me.
Will, thank you. That's a really helpful overview. And I think we were all impressed with your corporate background there. It's what everybody's aiming for. I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna. There's some questions that have come in, but I'm gonna save them until the end, and we're just going to go now straight away to Doug Bacon from Home Group, and Doug's going to offer us a short summary of the themes that we've been hearing about this afternoon, and talk about how they're playing out from his perspective, working for a northern-based social housing provider. So over to you, Doug.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I had a slide, but conscious of time, I won't even attempt to share it, and we'll make sure it's circulated afterwards. But I wanted to just really, summarize some of the points. I think Home Group is planning to implement the ESG framework. We kind of see it as a way of supporting the improvement of existing homes, but also building homes fit for the future. There's a key goal for us in our implementation of it, that it aligns to other frameworks where possible. So kind of some colleagues on the phone will be kind of building safety management bill that's up and coming, and that linked to kind of fire safety and overall customer safety, ISO 14001, and even the V1, G1 kind of regulatory scoring. There's linked components here. So we don't really see it as a duplication or as an additional kind of overlay, but it really can kind of build and kind of bring these things together. Broadly speaking, housing associations are doing all this stuff already, and I think that's a really useful thing to note. We think it aligns to the kind of levelling up agenda in the north, and kind of a key focus from government, hopefully even post-COVID. But when you combine it with a post-COVID economy and the sustainability focus, which Will has kind of talked us through, and the need for that kind of drive, thinking ahead to EPC deadlines and various things, we need to make a real difference in communities. And one of the ways, and continue to do that, and one of the ways an enabler to that is by either expanding or not limiting investment into the sector. We need kind of everything working for us to be able to continue to deliver these things. And one of the kind of, I guess, the kind of summaries and kind of the strategic element to that is obviously an increased cost of retrofitting homes over the next kind of 10 or 20, 30 years, moving towards net zero. Increased cost of new build to be able to meet the energy standards originally. At the same time as no one quite knows how new government funding for grant, particularly around shared ownership right to buy, don't quite know how that crystallizes in the market, given the different charging elements associated with shared ownership properties. All of that could mean quite a contraction of cash for housing associations. So anything that kind of improves our access and ability to access funding is important. Touching on something that Marcus had said previously, I think that retrofit bill, as many colleagues on the call will know, that kind of it's everyone's working through a pace, trying to model and think about 30-year business plan impacts. One of the things I'm keen about to kind of work with organisations like NatWest, we're working with another organisation, an Australian investment firm, to think about, rather than it being housing association money that pays for some of the new kit that has to go into homes, be it solar panels, air source heat pumps, whatever the next tomorrow's technology is. How can you combine that with ongoing green savings and better dynamic management of customer energy to come up with a way where effectively the customer not only saves money on their energy, but they effectively pay for the equipment in the first place? So because whilst the housing sector bill and Savills released some information and study that said the average cost to get to net zero would be between £20,000 and £45,000 a property, in some regards that doesn't even get you to net zero. So there'll still be an offsetting bill in 2051. So the only way to do that, and actually by 2050 you would have done that, but actually then you just then start the cycle again, because we will have added these capital components to our balance sheet and they will have to be replaced. So it's not a one-off hit, it is a permanent suppression in the cash flow and the balance sheet position of housing associations. So the only way, in my view, to kind of resolve that long term is to find a way of shifting how we focus and how we pay for some of this equipment. There are lease models now with cars. There are lease models available with a lot of different things. And actually, there are different changing accounting rules aside, there are ways of financing these sorts of equipment. The energy sector, we can learn as a housing association sector, we can learn a lot from them. None of the energy suppliers own the smart meters that are going onto the wall now in the UK. Someone else owns them. And they're able to keep it off balance sheet, and they're able to do that and enable that kind of roll out of that plan from a smart, okay, they're delayed, but a smart metering program, which is entirely or largely off balance sheet from a capital perspective. Housing needs to learn those lessons and apply them. We think access to funding is important. It can align solutions to tackle homelessness, well-being, fuel poverty, sustainability, and regen. I'm really excited by the challenges ahead because I think for once they actually have the same solution. You help a customer have a better home fabric and more efficient heating and lower energy bills. It helps their fuel poverty and well-being. It means homelessness can be reduced because the step to get into a stable home is less financially. Regenerating estates, all these things, for once, I think they have the same solution if we can work on it. And there's a real opportunity for larger associations to support smaller associations in knowledge sharing, resources, application of the frameworks, etc., as well, and beyond, as Will's talked about. Kind of, no one can do this alone, and I think that's the kind of, yeah, that's what I've got to say on the topic, I think.
That's great, Doug. Thank you. And, thank you for making that point about the link between net zero and the levelling up agenda. And that's certainly very much a key focus for the consortium and a key feature of our spending review submission. So look out for that. Oops, I haven't put my video on. I've been helpfully reminded there by Liam. Thank you. Doug also raised the issue there about the cost of the investment and how we pay for it, and one of the issues that regularly comes up is in terms of freedom and flexibilities around rent and about the sharing of the costs here. So we've got a question that came in from Gordon Watts earlier. We'll have the perpetual problem that we invest in a property, housing association incurs the costs and the customers reap the benefits, i.e. there's currently no payback mechanism. How do we make low carbon retrofit investable? So I'll save that. I'd like each of the panel members to have a go at that, please. So I don't know if you want to start, Doug.
Yeah, I can do. I fully agree with the question. I think it's a real challenge, again, particularly in the north. Home Group has a huge portfolio in Cumbria. Kind of the property market's pretty unique over there. And kind of talked to other colleagues on the call have talked about kind of aging homes, kind of damp issues, an odd private sector market, which kind of driven by Sellafield. So some, real issues, and they're replicated across the north. I think for me, it's again moving away from potentially traditional finance of bank lending, loans, bonds, and moving to this some off balance sheet solutions. There are technical solutions out there. They think DHS and the new SAP ratings might kind of have a solar panel jumping you 10 points on an EPC when it's combined with a battery. That kind of technical solution means you can get someone else to pay for it and own it, then the customer benefits, the housing association hasn't fronted the cost, it's kind of, it moves with the property as way someone else, but it is an investable item in and of itself. It doesn't have to be associated with the property like traditionally, like it has been. Those models, particularly with smart meters, when you combine it, means that the customer can have still has choice of energy supplier, but benefits from an overall better tariff management, and they use part of the saving to pay for this technology in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Who else would like to have a go at that?
I'm happy to have some comments on that. I mean, it's a really, really fair challenge, and it's a really, really difficult question to answer. I think that there's two sort of sides of how I think to answer this question. And one, realistically, if you have a conversation with a bank, one of the conversations has always been, what does it have on your financial returns? What financial impact does it have? And I think that conversation will always need to be had. But just as we're having the conversations internally as an institution around not just thinking about our financial returns on some of this, I think we do have to sort of step up at some point as organisations and say, well, actually, is this the right thing for us to do as organisations? I think it's really interesting that lots of different organisations are looking at the stock that they've got in their portfolios, as Will sort of indicated, and maybe refreshing their asset management strategy. One of the things that fills me full of fear, if I'm totally honest with you, is that I don't want to drive organisations to have a portfolio of assets that are great in terms of energy performance, and what they've done is just dispose of them into the private sector or into other sectors. It becomes someone else's issue. There has to be a balance. That's the honest answer. I think we all, as individuals and organisations, need to take a moment to reflect on what our priorities are. There has to be the financial justification to investing in assets. I get that. There has to also be an acknowledgement that maybe some of it is just not going to stack up. I think there is a combination of dealing with that as well. One, feeling a bit of the pain, financial pain, but also just the different models that Doug touched on as well. And also offsetting as well. There's lots of different options around potentially offsetting. If you can potentially offset the carbon footprint of your assets and do it in a more efficient way through investment, rather than just throwing a load of money at stock that you spend huge amounts. And it goes back to your value point as well. Some of this stuff is just not going to be worth investing in. So having different views around offsetting, different models, it has to be a real mix. But they're always going to be assets that just aren't worth investing in. It's that moral obligation as landlords, as charities, as organisations. Where do you draw the balance? And it's going to vary on a case by case basis as well. But it does, having a decent asset management strategy is key. But it does make me slightly nervous that if we just start seeing some of this stock going into secondary markets, will we ever deal with the issue, or will it just become someone else's issue as well? So it's a difficult one, but good luck.
Will's unmuted there, so I think.
I think I'd sort of emphasise again, have a look at the Coalition on Energy Efficient Buildings report. It's got a lot of innovative financial mechanisms that we could try out that might provide solutions. I think, as Marcus is saying, I think there is a note of prudence in terms of improving our stock. Dare I mention the G word, Grenfell, as perhaps an example of where things went slightly the wrong way in terms of improving a building. But I think, so it's really important that we take a prudent approach to this. The issue I have is that, on balance sheet versus off balance sheet solutions is that, from our key point of view, there is a benefit to our residents and to our business around well-being and potentially around financial performance if we do this the right way. And, therefore, investing, our money, which we can raise at the lowest cost of capital of anyone, really. When bringing in external providers, they've probably got a higher cost of capital than we do, even local authorities compared to us at the moment. And also the second thing is that the return expectations are a lot higher and not necessarily as longer term as we have. So if the government wants us to take the load, I think then they have to do two things. They really have to look at that. We can definitely provide the scale, and that will drive economies of scale. So that will reduce the cost, which is one good side of it. We haven't really had a good crack at that yet, not on a whole house retrofit basis. So that's good. the second side of that is, innovation. We've been stopping and starting on innovation for about 20 years in terms of whole house retrofit. A really good, consistent approach to innovation is needed now. And I think there is a bit of recognition in government now that that's possible, and the kind of ability to scale up and then drive the cost down. And then I think thirdly, a recognition that there is a split between, landlord investment and tenant gain, which, whilst we do get some benefit, there is going to be a gap as to what we can get back. So developing a model that allows us as landlords to achieve greater return on that investment and make it financially justifiable is really important. And the important thing about that is that there's a counter effect in that it is going to drive a different relationship with our customers, with residents, and a much closer relationship and a much more holistic. If we are not just a landlord, we're an energy service provider. And up to now, a lot of organisations, a lot of social housing organisations have not been very good at being that kind of other organisation other than a landlord that collects the rent. So, that's a challenge for the sector.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question here that is for Sarah, and is there any action being taken to make this a mandatory requirement in terms of the standard, and also who do we contact if we're interested in being an early adopter?
Sure, I'm happy to. And I should just thought on that last question, which the other panelists are better placed to answer than I, but one thought I had is we often talk about retrofit and the kind of green economy needs going hand in hand with job creation, you know what I mean? And when you're thinking about whole housing retrofit, is there an opportunity to create jobs for tenants which will increase incomes and therefore they can perhaps afford to pay a bit more rent? Anyway, I just throw that out there. So the sort of employment. But on the question, mandatory versus voluntary, no, it's a good question. For now, we're seeing this as a voluntary reporting standard, but we have been talking to the Financial Reporting Council that oversees the mandatory financial reporting for all sectors, including the housing sector. And definitely globally, there is a move towards what's called integrated reporting, the requirement for all organisations to report just not on their sort of financial performance, but also environmental and social performance. So our sense is that, this standard, may end up becoming a mandatory standard that fits within mandatory standards that are happening at the European and global and UK level. And we'll stay, we're staying very tied into some of those wider, reporting standards development. But I think, to be honest, the virtue of it being voluntary right now is this, developing it in a really collaborative, meaningful way. So I quite like the fact that we can be practitioner-led for now. Yeah. And being an early adopter, yes, I've used some of the time listening to others to already connect with some of you. So we've got a couple more early adopters signed up as we speak. So just email me, Liam, if you feel free to share my email. I put it on the chat. So email me directly if you want to sign up.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And you will also see that Liam has shared in the chat the link to the Green Finance Institute's Coalition for Energy Efficiency of Buildings report there. We did actually invite the Green Finance Institute to be part of the session, but they weren't available. So we will try and get them along to something in the future for you. We've had people being quite shy on the question front, but I know that Gordon Watts has got another question. Gordon, I'm going to invite you to pose your question directly to the panel here. I hope I'm not causing panics there with Liam on how the technology works to do that, but I hope that we can now just invite Gordon in to ask he's had a few questions just to ask directly.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can, Gordon, go ahead.
Which was the question? Because I've asked a few. The one about carbon pricing?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we're talking about low carbon retrofit, energy retrofit, and we're still measuring it. At the moment, we're treating it as a one-sided equation, because we're talking about all the investments, and it's all about the cost of putting the stuff in and the cost of the energy that is saved. We're still not valuing what we're actually trying to achieve, which is to reduce carbon emissions. We're not putting a value on the carbon emissions themselves. Now, I've had involvement in emissions trading in the past in things like glass making, steel making, but that's different. That's big industry. Do we think it might work? Could it work in housing?
I'm going to ask for people to give very brief responses to that so that we can still finish on time. So everybody who wants to answer, go with that succinctly.
I think that two parts. One, I think internally within housing associations, the use of carbon pricing to drive funding could work within the impacts and to drive a little bit more towards improvement of assets. So using internal offsets, if you like. Where it's got difficulty is the fact that you are dealing with a portion of the population who has extremely high fuel poverty. So if you are going to price carbon, you've really got to be careful on the fact that you're not creating fuel poverty issues at the same time, people who are already struggling to pay bills as they are. So there has to be a role then for government the way the housing association deals with those significant proportion of people in fuel poverty to buttress them from the effects of, so that they can still maintain a warm home. So, that's critical, I think.
I was thinking slightly differently. I was thinking it might work like, say, the EU ETS, where you get free allowances to a certain amount, and then it would be for the housing association to pick up the carbon cost, not the tenant, the housing association.
Well, I think it potentially does work.
My finance director would hate me for even suggesting this, but I'm just putting it out there.
I think it could really align with the kind of offsetting piece. I think housing associations, we have and sit on a lot of infill land, the strip of land next to a housing estate, the bit of grass over the road from another one. And that kind of offsetting, UK-based offsetting post-Brexit will have to play a core part of what we do. At the same time as if a housing association can achieve net zero or negative carbon, why can't it sell that space to someone else?
Yeah.
And kind of to a polluter, or at least understand of what that impact is. Carbon accounting at a property level will have to happen in some form. And kind of, as will offsetting, because certainly from a home group perspective, not all our homes will ever make it. And to the conversation before, won't be financially viable to invest in the levels that are fully required to get to net zero. So, definitely.
Right.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on and asking that question. I'm going to wrap things up here because I get into trouble if I don't finish things on time. So can I just thank again our excellent panel of speakers today. It's really, really interesting contributions, which I'm sure that everybody listening has really, really enjoyed. I did say that this is one in a series of our North Net Zero webinars, so please do visit My NHC, where there are details of all of the events and roundtables and so on that we're running. And I mentioned there would be an email coming out to you after this event with a link to the recording and also a briefing note. And we will also send you a feedback survey. Really important to us at the consortium that you fill that in and tell us what you like, what you don't like, and so on, so that we can use that to inform our future programme. I just wanted to thank again our campaign partners, Liverpool City Region Housing Associations, Halton Housing, Together Housing, 13 and Consortium Procurement. And can I thank all of you for joining us today. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that we see you at the next one. And take care, everybody, and stay safe.